Okay, well, hello, I'm John Clifton. I'm a product manager at Sonar, and today I'm very pleased to be joined by Paul Edwards from Wolters Kluwer. He's going to talk to us about a problem that his team have solved, and it's one that we're seeing all over the place. In a world where you can write code faster and faster and faster, how do you maintain the right level of quality without slowing to a crawl? Now, I met Paul a little while ago when I was cheerfully presenting on stage, and I was talking about this customer, and they've had this huge success. They've got their scan time hugely reduced, and Paul raised his hand, and I said, "Yes, how can I help?" And he said, "That was me," and my heart stopped. However, it was one of the best presentations we had because he went on to talk about all of the things that they've done at Wolters Kluwer to really improve things and really streamline this complex workflow. And that's why we're here today, to talk a little bit about that. So before we start, Paul, could you tell us a little about yourself and what you do at Wolters Kluwer?
Sure. So I'm Paul Edwards. I work at Wolters Kluwer in our tax and accounting business. I am a DevSecOps architect, so I'm responsible for implementing DevSecOps practices and standards across our European businesses. So that includes quite a large portfolio over a large number of countries, and trying to really drive out efficiencies and standards, and implementing tools like Sonar.
Fantastic, thank you. And if we think back to sort of before the big transformation, what were the signs? Why was it obvious that the change was needed at the scale you're going to talk about?
So technical debt was something that was handled at a very local level, and different teams had different levels of visibility of technical debt, and also different levels of technical debt themselves. So it was very difficult to see at a portfolio level where we were lying and where the team should be focusing. So it was a little bit of a case of we didn't know what we didn't know from an executive level. So we wanted to really drive out the qualities that we wanted in our product, and we had non-negotiables around security and quality standards that we needed to deliver to ensure that our products met our customers' needs and also met our own standards. So it was about putting those controls in place, the governance and the guardrails, to ensure that we could get to where we wanted to be with the quality of our products.
Fantastic, thank you. And can you talk a little bit about that? When you talk about guardrails, is this the quality gates, or is it more? What did that transformation look like?
So when it came to the transformation for us, we wanted to implement these non-negotiable standards, and we wanted them to be standard across the board, across all of our products within Europe. It was a case of enforcing a standard for the first time and making that a baseline, so that every change that is made in our system, every pull request that comes in, has the same standards applied, and we stop technical debt building up at the point of merging, rather than letting things into our master branches and catching them later down the line. We wanted to really shift that quality left and have a quality gate which applied our standards and ensure that all new code met those standards.
And how that must have been quite a mindset shift from, the developers, everyone's under a deadline, getting that code in and then finessing it afterwards, shifting to this, it's got to be good enough to go in the first place. How did you help the teams understand that this really was going to help them?
Absolutely. And years ago, we did have the situation where we were using, I believe, the community edition of Sonar, and we didn't have the ability to do the PR analysis with that edition. And when we had a case where things would get into the master and then would build up in a backlog of technical debt, they'd be identified after the fact. So teams were very used to this cycle of working on focusing on feature delivery, but then at some point having to deal with technical debt. And it was always very difficult for them to schedule in the time to work on the remediation for that technical debt. And obviously our product community want to focus on feature delivery. We want to get the most value out for our customers. We don't want to stop and have to say, now we have to deal with these issues that have been creeping in over time. So what we wanted to do is to really push that back and stop things getting in. So when it came to actually getting teams on board, it was surprisingly easy to convince teams, because people don't like context switching. They don't like stopping and coming back to something later, and something that might be fixed within minutes or hours whilst you're working on it could be days or longer if you have to come back to that. So the teams were actually they saw the benefits and they were able to get on board fairly early. So it was a surprise, because obviously change can be resisted, especially when you're changing the way that people work. But we're bringing in the same quality standards across the board. So it also made it easier for team members to move around to work on different assets, because they're aware that they've got the same processes, the same standards that are being applied. It's not down to the opinion of a senior engineer when it comes to review. We have these core standards that are rolled out across the board, and that actually made it easier for developers to meet those standards, and they knew what the standards were, and they were able to get them in. So yeah, there was some resistance, more so around legacy assets, maybe older assets, but the teams are actually fairly easy to convince to get them on board.
That's great to hear. I would never have thought of the sort of the ability to move between teams as a nice side effect of this. So was that something you expected on the way in, or was that a nice surprise?
I think it was a nice surprise for us all. It's something that obviously within a large organization we want to be able to apply our resources where they're needed. So you don't want to have silos of resource that can't work across products. So that's where we've been driving a lot of standards across the board around the tool chain that we use, technologies, but also without limiting creativity and innovation. But by getting those baseline standards in, that really made it easy for people to move around, and they knew what to expect.
Oh, that's great to hear. Yeah, in fact, you've hit on a couple of things. We'll talk about those later on. Have you seen? I mean, it sounds like there was a lot of positivity about this move, both from the sort of the leadership teams, but also the engineers. Are both groups seeing the benefits they expected?
Yes, I believe so. We don't have that awkward conversation now between technology and product that we need to handle some technical debt. Can we stop delivering features? Because it's all rolled up into that development process. The developers like that. They like to get the instant feedback. They like that the feedback is within the tool stack that they're using. So within GitHub or within Azure DevOps, they don't have to go off to somewhere else to find the feedback. It's available right within their process. Obviously available within their IDE as well if they use the extensions. But having that feedback at the pull request stage has really benefited them, and it's also gives them that kind of initial set of items to work on once their code is ready for review. And then maybe there'll be other automated code reviews that happen at that stage, such as kind of Copilot based reviews, before it goes on to being assigned to a senior engineer or multiple engineers for the human review. But it gives us that level of quality before it gets onto someone else's plate. So it's not down to the senior engineers to look at the very basics and checking that we meet every standard that the quality gate's going to be checking for, but they can actually look at the bigger picture and the things that the automated tools are not going to be picking up and use, and really adding value there rather than having to try and cover everything.
I have to ask, if in the old world it was about getting you're rushing to get the feature in there, and then you'll fix sort of some of the problems that are maybe the long tail later on. You move to a model where you're fixing sort of the key stuff up front before it even gets in. Does that mean that your delivery dates are moving out, or is it actually, are you using something quite different?
No, we don't see that at all. We see that because we're not building up this backlog of technical debt, that our cadence overall has sped up. We're delivering faster. We are able to deliver with quality because we don't have to regularly stop and have to address technical debt. And particularly if it's an individual who's working on a change, they introduce something that would be flagged, they remediate that as part of their pull request. In the traditional approach, they would have put that code into production. Maybe a couple of months down the line, somebody else is assigned this piece of work to remediate it. Maybe they're not familiar with that area. They're not familiar with the change. They didn't make the change themselves. So it takes them that much longer to get up to speed to then be able to address the issue. So by bringing it in as early as possible for the individual who made the change, they're in the best position to fix that. And therefore, overall, the amount of resource we spend on remediating technical debt is smaller.
That's great. And so the sort of at the macro level, it sounds like you all the buy-in was there, and that's fantastic.
Mhm.
The challenge is sometimes in the details. So when it came to the sort of the specific conditions within your quality gates, I know you had I think an 80% test coverage requirement. Were there any particular rules that met with pushback, and how did you address that?
Yes, so we made a decision early on that across Europe we wanted to implement one standard that we were going to have as our baseline. We did not want to deviate for every team based on individual product requirements or individual team preferences. So we decided we want to take the Sonar way as our standard, but what we would allow was for more strict gates to be defined if a team wanted to actually bring in additional rules that are not part of the standard. The bulk of the assets are on a more strict standard now, but the one area that we did get some pushback on was around the test coverage. That was something that obviously was an issue for more so the smaller number of legacy assets where testability might have been an issue from an automated unit test perspective. Obviously, if they start to scan their product, then it's going to identify that the test coverage doesn't meet the standard. But obviously, we pushed that the standard is for new code, not for the existing code base. So we ensured that for all pull requests, all new code meets the 80% standard. Then perhaps you would get some pushback that the code is not potentially testable from a unit testing perspective. And then the argument would be we have to put more effort in now to maybe refactor the code to make it testable in order to then meet that baseline. And it's something that we held firm on. And we also encouraged the use of AI code gen tools to help with that refactoring and with the unit test development as well. And that's something that it was for a very small number of cases we had that pushback, and we were able to get over that initial hump. And then for all subsequent changes, they were able to meet that 80%.
God, that's brilliant. And did you, when it came to sort of the exact standard that everybody agreed to, how did you get agreement across such a big organization with so many different requirements? How did you get to a standard that made sense?
Well, we started off in a great place with the Sonar way. So we were saying this is the way that Sonar Cube are recommending we control the code that comes into our system. And then it was just a case of working with individual teams and identifying cases where we want to tighten things up or we want to add in additional rules. So it was relatively straightforward, given that we wanted to set the baseline and say this is the standard. We're not going to reduce this standard and hold firm on that, and that made it relatively straightforward for us.
Brilliant. And have you seen, as teams are sort of moving to this new way of working with the sort of the hard rules, the Sonar way or Sonar way plus to get through, how are you seeing the interaction between the teams or between members of the teams as they're doing these peer reviews change?
I find that the peer reviews are now more focused on where the real value is in the change. So not having to look at the very low level details, the things that we now rely on SonarQube for. So it's allowing them to have a level of confidence that when a PR comes for review, that the basics have been checked. We're not expecting the senior developers to look at naming conventions for variables and kind of low level items, but we want them to really add value using the knowledge that they've built up over the years. And that I find that gives us a better interaction between developers and reviewers because they're focused more on what is this change for, looking at the bigger picture. Does it meet the needs of our customers? Does it meet our baseline standard, whilst knowing that we've got the confidence that SonarQube has also analyzed the change and it's met the quality gate. So that ticks a lot of those hygiene factors that are non-negotiable. And then the senior engineers can focus on where they can apply their knowledge that the automated tools obviously don't have.
Yeah, absolutely. And that feeds into my next question, where I was thinking, as you the risk is, as you apply more and more structure and constraints to the way of working, it's easy to lose sort of the sense of autonomy, the ability to really be creative and innovative. How do you balance that? How do you ensure the teams have got that room to flex their brains and solve creatively?
Yeah, what we're trying to do is separate principles from preferences, the teams. So we have non-negotiable standards that we want to meet as our baseline, ensuring the quality gate passes, but we're not then going to constrain creativity or prevent teams from innovating by carefully controlling how they implement a solution. What we want to be firm on are principles around the quality gate and the standards that are non-negotiable, but giving them the freedom to still innovate and bring in new technology and not constrain how they actually deliver, whilst knowing that we're still applying the same baseline principles and standards across the board.
Mhm. Great. And going back to a comment you made earlier about using AI to help with creating tests, I think in the past you've talked about it's less about AI for writing code. It's more about AI as a supporting actor, helping you refactor, write tests. How does AI fit into the workflow, and how do you see that working?
So we use Gen AI for a number of use cases. So developers are now almost pair programming with AI. It's someone to bounce ideas off, someone to gain an understanding of a code base perhaps they're not familiar with. But then when it comes to actual delivery, it's a tool they can use to accelerate the delivery of a feature by having that code written for you, which they can then work through with the AI, and that comes down to feature delivery, but also the unit testing and refactoring of code, perhaps that is not testable. So it's I see it almost as if engineers are kind of working as a pair programmer with the AI tools now. So it's not a case of just delegating everything and saying off you go and do it, but bouncing ideas off and gaining understanding of code bases is something we see a lot, and then doing a lot of those maybe more painful tasks like the implementation of unit tests, which we all know that developers like to write code, not so much the tests, but they can use tools like Gen AI code generation tools to accelerate that, and also to help them identify test cases and to validate what they're doing and to check. When they raise a PR, they can ask the agents to check. Have I considered everything? Are we meeting all our standards? And have it recheck the code. So there's a variety of ways that they're using these tools. What it all comes down to is that there's additional code that's being written, being generated, whether it's functional code or test code, and it's all additional code that needs to be reviewed as part of the pull request. And that's where it doesn't matter whether it's written by a human or by AI with the human. It all needs to be reviewed. It all needs to meet the same standards. And we know that it's all going to go through and meet our quality gate before it gets seen by a senior engineer for review.
Absolutely. And do you see I mean, you talked about using AI to generate tests. Are you seeing that the AI tooling is really helping people get through the gate more easily, more quickly?
Absolutely, particularly around tests, and particularly maybe where there are where the unit testing is a little bit more complex, just the testing of UI applications. We find that the AI tools are very good at generating test cases and applying them, and it's something that the developers are really benefiting from, and particularly in those areas maybe where the code was not testable from a unit testing perspective, and it needed some refactoring to support unit testing. And in those cases, typically there would be a lot of other automated testing, end-to-end testing wrapped around the products, but maybe at a unit test level, individual methods wouldn't necessarily be testable. So that's where we've found benefits of having the AI work on refactoring to ensure that we can test that at every level in that pyramid. So we've got full coverage that SonarCube sees to allow the gate to pass, and then that flows through to all of our other layers of testing, including automated regression testing that runs end to end, integration tests and manual ad hoc testing as well on top of that.
Wow. And it's, I mean, this is such a huge change, but things aren't standing still. As we look forwards through the rest of this year into next year, um, does it become more automatic? Does it become purely automatic verification? What's your view on, and Wolters Kluwer's view on the future and how you're preparing for it?
I think we're always going to rely on having senior engineers review changes, and our policy is typically at least 2 senior engineers on top of the automated tools, so on top of a Copilot review, on top of the Sonar Cube quality gate, and we're not going to take the human out of the loop there. And this is just to get the change through to be built and deployed for testing. But then obviously there's the whole QA operation that runs around the automated testing that then happens off of the back of a deployed product. So we still feel that that's not going to change. Maybe the code being produced might be larger in volume and more rapidly written because of the assistance that the AI agents give our engineers. But we're not going to bypass those levels. We still want those quality senior engineers in the loop, ensuring that we're meeting our standards and that we're delivering what we need for our customers.
Brilliant. And if you think back to this whole journey you've been on with the company, is there anything that you'd call out as being a particular positive or negative surprise from the whole thing?
I think one of the things that was a surprise initially was once we implemented quality gates within the pull requests, we had quite wide acceptance, and it was great, thumbs up across the board. So then we put in some auditing around, actually, do we have any cases where the gate has been used but is not mandatory within a policy for a given repository? So across Azure DevOps and GitHub, we can define rules for what happens when PRs are raised and what are the mandatory checks that are run. And we found that we didn't have all teams with mandatory checks on. So they may have had the gate implemented, but it was not mandatory. So it could have failed and it wouldn't have blocked the code from being merged. And obviously this is against the principle of what we're trying to achieve. So I think that was a kind of an early stage from once we had implemented the quality gates at PR level. And then the next stage was, actually, we need to push through and mandate this across the board. So it's something that I would highly recommend other customers check, is that once you have DevOps integrations configured from Sonar Cube back to your DevOps platform, to actually review and check the policies that the check is being mandated and is not optional. Because obviously, if it's optional, then it could pass, it could fail, and it doesn't stop you from then merging those changes in. We also know that there are cases where people have the rights to bypass policies, even if they are mandatory. So that's something, again, that we fed into that process to look at who has access to bypass policies, to tighten that up, and to make it very clear that there'd have to be a significant business reason to bypass a policy, and just tighten that up. Because again, there's no point having the quality gate there if it can just be bypassed. So it's just about tightening up governance around that and making sure that we are actually enforcing these things. So that was a surprise early on, that behavior. But by putting that monitoring and governance in place, it's something that is now mandatory across the board. It's something that I would love the product to do as well. Actually, it's if the product could check branch policies for me and tell me whether or not it's mandated, that would be a real nice to have.
I will scribble that down. Thank you. So as we move to, this is my final question. As we look forward, so if you've got an architect or a team lead listening today and they're thinking, yeah, I like what I hear, what's the first step, couple of steps, challenge you'd recommend they look into solving?
My first recommendation would be switch it on. So deploy Sonar Cube, configure pull request reviews, and you don't have to have that gate mandated like we just talked about. Get visibility of the scale of the problem potentially. So start to look at the results and look at whether or not your PRs are passing. And even if they're not mandated, once you have that DevOps integration in place, SonarQube is going to start commenting on the PRs, and the developers are going to start to get feedback, and it's going to potentially surprise them, and they will hopefully find that helpful and start to maybe address those issues. It's not until you mandate that the gate passes that it stops it getting into your master branch. But I would say switch it on, and there's no harm in getting that feedback onto the PR. And then when you're at a point where you're ready to switch on and make it mandatory, then that's when obviously everything suddenly has to pass. But I would just recommend get the product in and run PR analysis. It doesn't have to be mandated, but you need to switch it on, and your developers will start getting feedback immediately.
Oh, that's brilliant. Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much. That reached the end of my question. So first, just wanted to say thank you. It's so great to hear this such a big change that went so well. So thank you again.
Thank you.